Good morning and welcome to Focus Today. I am Jerry Bilden, sitting in for Paulina Leiser, who sits in for Steve Johnson, who sits in for Perry Atkinson. We're getting to the end of the bench here at theDove, but I'm glad you're here. I hope you're having a great morning. Hey, today we're going to have Steve had a previous conversation with Dinesh D'Souza, #1 New York Times bestseller, author and creator of the movie America. And there was a lot of discussion earlier as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came and spoke to Congress. And Steve Johnson had a chance to talk to Dinesh D'Souza about that. Let's hear what they have to say.
Well, you've heard of Dinesh D'Souza, of course, through his books and the different movies that you've seen, and including the one that's most recently, America, Imagine the World Without Her. Dinesh, before we start talking, I want to mention to people who might not be familiar either with your books or perhaps your movies, he's the author of What's So Great About America, The Roots of Obama's Rage, God Forsaken. Now, there's one that I haven't read. How long ago was that written, God Forsaken?
That came out in 2012. It's a book that examines the issue of God and suffering.
Okay. Also, as I mentioned, America, Imagine the World Without Her, and 2016, Obama's America, which you said came out in 2012. That really got quite a bit of viewing in that period of years, didn't it?
Well, it was a film that tried to show a side of Obama that people just didn't know. And it wasn't just that I said this is how Obama is. I was in Hawaii and I was in Indonesia and Kenya. I was at the Obama family homestead. I interviewed his brother. So I brought out a side of the president that I think is very troubling and has actually been quite prophetic. It has actually tracked some of the things that he has done after the film came out. At the end of 2016, we made some sort of prophecies about Obama. This is what he's likely to do. And sure enough, he's gone ahead and done it.
I really like the subtitle you had, which I think was of interest to anybody, who, no matter what side of the political barrier they might be on. Love him or hate him, you don't know him. I thought that was quite clever. So kudos to that. I imagine you came up with that, right?
Well, I appreciate that. In some ways, I'm tempted to issue a sequel now saying love him or hate him. Now we know him because he's been in for 6 years. We've got a pretty good idea of what his priorities are, and both in foreign policy and in domestic policy. So I think Obama has now finally become a known quantity, and many of the people who voted for him, even twice, are beginning to run from him now.
Okay, I want to get into one of the most recent things that's happened in the news, where we've seen Benjamin Netanyahu come and speak, and it's amazing how that speech became so polarizing as to who invited him to come, when I think a lot of us were saying, well, what does he have to say? Let's move beyond the invitation itself. And, it seemed to come down to two, if I can distill it down, two people, two sides, those who said that they wanted to hear what he would have to say, and then those who said they felt, after they saw it, that they were being lectured. I thought the Democratic response was very interesting, because I thought, well, if you feel like you're being lectured, then what was your motivation anyway? What is your reaction when you saw what the Prime Minister was saying to us first, and then your reaction to seeing what the Democrats had to say about his speech? It seemed to be quite polarized. What did you think of his speech first?
Well, I think that the first thing that struck me when I heard him speak was how bold and confident Netanyahu was. He reminded me a little bit of Reagan. Second, I was struck by how passionate he is in defense of his country. I wish we had a leader here in America who spoke as forcefully in defense of American interests as Netanyahu spoke in defense of Israeli interests. Third, I thought that he made a strong case. His case is very simple. The mullahs have vowed to eradicate Israel. That's point number one. And point number two is they want to get an atomic bomb. And point number three is that a country like Israel, recognizing an existential threat to its security, needs to figure out a way to prevent the Iranians from getting a bomb. I can't find fault with any of the premises in that logic or in the reasoning of it. Then you have Obama, who, by the way, is the most sanctimonious lecturer of the American people, I think, in the last 100 years. So here's a guy who, pompously declares that, no, he has a better understanding of Israeli interests than Israel. And this is so characteristic of Obama. Apparently, he understands the Quran better than the mullahs. He's lecturing the Taliban on what Islam means. He's telling ISIS that those people aren't truly Muslims. So there's a clownish aspect to all this, I think, for those of us who have a sense of the ridiculous. Of course, Obama's own followers don't. They mindlessly follow the Pied Piper. But I was kind of distressed by the Democratic response. Israel has, by and large, enjoyed pretty bipartisan support in America for the past 40 years or 50 years since the formation of the State of Israel. But now it looks like the Democrats, like the Europeans, who were once pro-Israel but have now basically become critics of Israel.
Why, since we did at one point have a difference in philosophy based on how to solve problems, but they may be common problems, now we have even a hard time being on the same page to define what the problem is. Do you think, well, first of all, how did we get to that point? I mean, when you say Democrat and Republican, it brings up totally opposite images at this point from what it used to be 20, 30 years ago. Why do you think that's happened?
I think that the dividing line began in the 1960s, although it reached its climax with Obama. In other words, I think that if you look at Democratic presidents, for example, Truman or Kennedy, I would say even Clinton, they shared with Republicans the goals of where America ought to be. They generally agreed that they wanted to have a prosperous free market economy. In fact, their idea was that we can't redistribute wealth if we don't have a goose that's laying the golden eggs. So we need to sustain the market system. Second of all, they generally agreed that America has been a force for good in the world. They favor the idea of a strong America. If you listen to JFK's speeches, he's constantly talking about the need to keep America strong. He was an anti-communist, for example. So there was a consensus between the Republicans and the Democrats about goals, although there was a disagreement about the means. How do we get from A to B? I think what's changed and what we see now with Obama is a sense that his goals are different. He doesn't necessarily want America to be a strong force in the world. He sees us as that strength as leading to a kind of bullying oppression. He doesn't necessarily like the free market system. You get the sense that he has 20 ideas about how to redistribute the pie, but absolutely none about how to make a pie or how to make a pie grow. So this is something a little bit different. And this is one of the reasons it's much more difficult to find common ground when one guy wants to go to Chicago and the other guy wants to go to Maine.
Do you think that it's that the Democratic Party, who seems to be following lockstep pretty much with the president, has changed because of him, or has the Democratic Party created him?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. The Democratic Party has attached itself at the hip to Obama. So if he goes down, they go down. And we've seen, for example, that his unpopularity led to wrecking losses in the midterm election, both in the House and in the Senate. So he's been dragging the Democratic Party down, certainly in the last couple of years. That's true. But I think what's really happened is that there is a left-wing progressive movement within the Democratic Party. Those are Obama's guys. And they have been gaining force or strength in the Democratic Party. So that a figure like Elizabeth Warren, who 20 years ago would be marginal in the Democratic Party, is now central. And there's actually talk about her possibly challenging Hillary Clinton. So you'd have the left and the far left vying for supremacy within the Democratic Party. And that's Obama's movement within the Democratic camp.
You know, I think that talking about how the Democrats are functioning and the Republicans is important. I think the Netanyahu visit certainly pointed out the different views as to who was even going to sit and watch that speech. Let me give you a stereotype and tell me what you think of this. It would appear, if we were looking at the Democratic Party as going more liberal for whatever reason, the Republicans don't seem to have their act together, and there's a void of leadership there. Would you agree to that? There are a lot of people who want to be leaders, but we don't see that Churchill, Reagan individual coming forward. Would you say the Republican Party is somewhat adrift right now?
Yes, I would. And I do think, looking back, when I came of age, I was in college in the early 80s. I was a young Reaganite in the 80s. And I thought of Reagan as embodying, if you will, the conservative and the Republican mindset. But now as I look back, I'm beginning to think that Reagan was a little bit of an anomaly, a stranger, and that the typical Republican is a Gerald Ford, a Nelson Rockefeller, a Bob Dole. And these guys are basically, you know, they're go along, get along guys. They're driven by timidity. They do have convictions, but they don't have the courage of their convictions. and they just don't know how to operate in the political arena, and that they surrender the whole cultural arena. The left has been making massive headway in education, in media, in entertainment. The Republicans seem to have no answer to that. And so I think the Republican Party is in considerable disarray. It's unbelievable failure to produce serious candidates, not just once, not just twice, but 3, 4, 5 times in a row is a sign of a party that's truly lost its way.
Do you think that those who call themselves Republican actually are looking for that bold leader you're talking about, or are they really looking for somebody who will get along with the other party?
No, I think that the rank and file Republicans are looking for that bold leader, but I think part of the problem is that the bold leader doesn't just materialize like a messiah out of nowhere. Even Reagan, when he came along, most of the ideas that Reagan represented, the ideas that today we call Reaganism, those ideas were before Reagan. They preceded Reagan. Jack Kemp was talking about supply-side economics, and Gene Kirkpatrick about what came to be called the Reagan Doctrine, and there was a general named Daniel Graham promoting missile defenses. My point is, this idea that someone will come riding in out of nowhere, have all the perfect ideas, that's not going to happen. It is incumbent upon Republicans and conservatives to generate the ideas and institutions, and the best you can hope for is a good leader who will come along and articulate those ideas into the general political bloodstream.
Okay, when you saw the speech, for example, this speech seemed to be a little bit for, well, it seemed to be mostly for America, but also there was some talk about how Netanyahu's speech was one that was just before an election and all the rest, and I'm not sure that most Americans really paid a whole lot of attention to that. But do you think this was a speech that benefited more Israel or the United States that he gave us?
Well, I think part of what Netanyahu was trying to argue is that Israel is America's stalwart and reliable ally in the Middle East, and that it is not good either for Israel or America that the Iranians have a nuclear bomb. Now, it's obviously more lethal for Israel because they could be on the receiving end of such a bomb. But certainly, if that were to happen, America's situation in the Middle East would be extremely perilous. We don't have a whole lot of allies in that region. Thanks to Obama, we've lost a couple that we did have. I mean, we lost Iran under Jimmy Carter when he supported the ouster of the Shah and got Khomeini. Under Obama, Mubarak, our ally, was pushed out of Egypt. And the Muslim Brotherhood came in. Obama's now been doing what he can to antagonize the Egyptian military. Libya, I wouldn't say that Gaddafi was our ally, but he was doing business with America. Obama got him killed, and now there's chaos in Libya, and ISIS and the other radical groups are all operating freely in that country. So we've been doing what we can to undermine America's strength in the region. We need Israel.
Okay. I just want to let our viewers and listeners know we're talking to Dinesh D'Souza, author of numerous books and movies as well. The latest film, America, Imagine the World Without Her. We're going to continue our discussion with him. We're going to be talking about some of the topics in the news today. Hillary's emails, is it a big deal or not? And should we be making a lot about that? We'll be talking to him coming up in just about 2 minutes here on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
We're back with Dinesh D'Souza, author of quite a few books you might have read. What's So Great About America? The Roots of Obama's Rage, God Forsaken. He's also made films as well. America, Imagine the World Without Her is one you might have seen. And we're talking about some of the topics in the news today. We've been discussing Benjamin Netanyahu's recent speech. And now I'd like to move to this whole issue of emails, which, Dinesh, I'll tell you, I think some people are saying, why are we making such a big deal about Hillary's emails? I've got an email account, so does she, and so what's the big deal? Distill, if you could, why you think this might be a bigger issue or not.
Well, I think we can understand these things a little bit better if we use a little basis of comparison. So here you've got General Petraeus, a highly decorated military general, commander of our forces in the Middle East, very successful soldier. And he has been prosecuted and, in a sense, pressured into pleading guilty for what? For essentially exposing himself to the release of confidential information. There's no proof that he did release it, but he made himself vulnerable to it. Why? Because he apparently took classified documents out of his office. He made them available to a woman he was having a relationship with, and the idea was that he compromised national security for doing that. And the government has been going after this highly decorated soldier with all their power in order to cow him into submission. It's an issue of Petraeus' judgment, and it's an issue of exposing America to risk. Now, here you have, with Hillary Clinton, a highly experienced political veteran. This is not some neophyte or this is somebody who's been in politics a long time, whose husband was the president of the United States, who actually knows better. And she has now, for 4 years, been conducting official government business consistently and regularly through a private email system that is not available to the general government. And in fact, when her records were demanded to be produced, were not produced, because this was part of her apparently private archive of emails. Now, this, to me, is a much greater violation than anything that Petraeus did. It exposes our national secrets. This is a high official who's dealing not just with one country, but multiple countries. And so this is a situation which I think is, if the Petraeus matter is serious, this is much more serious. And I don't know why Republicans take this kind of jaded attitude of that, if Sarah Palin did it, she'd be in prison, but it's Hillary, so it's because she's going to get away with it. The truth of the matter is that the Republicans control both houses of Congress. When I remember back to the 1980s, the Democrats who control Congress then were able to use that power to absolutely torment the Reagan administration. And even though Reagan was overwhelmingly popular, much more popular than Obama is today, the Democrats almost impeached him over the Iran-Contra business. So I would like to see the Republican Congress, not just on this matter of emails, but the general trend of lawlessness that we see throughout this Obama administration. I'd like to see a special prosecutor. I'd like to see investigations, a much more careful scrutiny of what the Obama administration has been doing. That's why the Republicans were voted into office, to do that, and they're not doing it.
I think some people may be jaded. We're looking at Benghazi saying, wow, all these years and nothing has happened there either, so probably nothing will happen with Hillary. Is this a different situation, or do you think this could be stuck in that quagmire of politics where not much is done?
Well, first of all, I think that there are no dead horses in American politics. And if you think back, for example, to the Watergate scandal, that scandal happened in the 1972 election campaign, and Nixon resigned in 1974, if I remember correctly. So it was 2 years after the fact, and nevertheless, it was prosecuted with tremendous vigor by the Washington Post, of course, but by the media, which hated Nixon. Part of the problem here is that the megaphones that the left has are much bigger than the megaphones on the right. In general, the right has Fox News Channel, talk radio, and that's pretty much it. The left has National Public Radio, they have Broadway, they have Hollywood, they have all the three major networks, they've got a whole bunch of cable channels, and so their megaphones are much bigger, and their media is running cover for Obama and for Hillary. So we're in a peculiar situation where the press is not doing its job. I'm convinced that if you had impeachable evidence on Obama and gave it to the New York Times, they would do their best to bury it, because they see their job as one of insulating President Obama and Hillary from the criticism of the right. It's kind of a shameless derogation of duty on the part of many people in the so-called media.
Well, and I think a lot of people would agree with you on with the media synopsis that you had there. They're just not willing to do some investigations. If we had a stronger Republican Party than the one that we talked about earlier, would that be sufficient pressure to move this thing forward at perhaps a faster speed, at least the investigation of it all?
Absolutely. I'm not of the view that strong in this context means shrill or the desire to say crazy things or the desire to make mountains out of molehills. I'm talking about a mainstream approach that holds the liberals and the Democrats to exactly the same standard that they hold the Republicans. There's no reason that we should not demand and get that. And the reason is that in the political sphere, there's a complete balance of power. For a while there, the Republicans only had half a branch of government, namely the Congress. But now the Republicans have the House and the Senate. They're just as strong as the Democrats were in the 1980s. We have the Congress, they have the presidency, and the Supreme Court is teetering right in the middle. That's an even balance of power. But you wouldn't know that if you look at the political landscape. It looks like the Democrats are completely in charge, and our guys are just trying to get themselves heard. I think that shows an incredible invertebrate approach on the part of the Republicans in the Congress. They need to get a little bit more backbone, and they need to act creatively and effectively.
Let me bring in the third element of the power structure in the United States, and that's the judiciary. I think a lot of people have been seeing what we had accused in the past of seeing an activist Supreme Court or an activist appellate court. It seems like that we're almost assuming they will make laws now because of how they've interpreted sometimes some would say a convoluted interpretation of current laws. What are your concerns about what some have said is a growing activist court system we have in the United States where they're not interpreting law anymore, but they're essentially writing it?
Well, I think that to the degree that occurs, it's a troubling trend, whether it happens on the left or on the right, because it really moves us away from the fundamental political system that our founders created. The founders created a separation of powers and checks and balances, a very delicately organized system that puts the legislative authority in the Congress. The president's job is to carry out those laws, and the Supreme Court's job is the umpire. The Supreme Court's job is to match the laws up against the Constitution and make sure that the laws are congruent with the principles in the Constitution. So if the Supreme Court gets away from that and becomes a quasi-legislature, then they are duplicitously using the Constitution as a pretext in which to invalidate laws and, in a sense, create their own laws. I mean, this is just you may as well say that the founding architecture has now been fatally tampered with if that becomes a routine.
And that leads into the next question I had. As you look back to what our founding fathers had wanted as far as the structure of the United States and what we have now, how far are we from that goal that they had when they were writing the documents that we supposedly use as a basis for our life in the United States?
I think that the one area that we have departed from significantly and really disastrously is not in the area of one branch of government usurping the privileges of another, but rather in the overall power assigned to government itself. In other words, the founders were very careful to define limited government. And limited government means that even the majority has a limitation imposed on its powers by the Constitution. There are things that even 99% of the people, if they wanted to do it, cannot do because the Constitution forbids it. So, for example, if 99% of people decide, listen, Dinesh D'Souza has a very nice house, we're going to go to his house and take his house and take his car and prevent him from starting a business, that power is not given to the majority under our Constitution. They don't have the authority to do that. I think one of the tragedies of our time is that government has been ignoring the limits of government power, ignoring that we live in a society in which there are enumerated powers given to the government, and beyond those, the government is not supposed to. Beyond that, it's not supposed to go, but in fact, it has been encroaching, crossing that line, trespassing, making laws in areas where it has simply no authority.
Now, a defeatist would say, well, we've passed that line, we're well beyond it, we'll never get back. Do you have hope that somehow that concept of what the Constitution really is about and the laws that we have will return at some point? Does everything swing back to another era which might be more in line with our founding fathers, do you think?
Well, it's worthwhile here to remember what Lincoln said during the Civil War, because Lincoln recognized prior to the Civil War that slavery had spread far more than the founders had ever wanted it to. The founders kind of were hoping and believed that slavery was sort of on its way out. But not only was slavery spreading in the United States, but it was you actually had the emergence of a so-called positive good school of slavery. People who thought slavery was not just a necessary evil, but a good thing. But Lincoln's point was, look, he says, I recognize that the constitutional structure has been transcended here, and that the founders' attitude towards slavery is no longer the attitude in the United States, or at least in large parts of the United States. But Lincoln said, look, what we have to do is just start moving it back to where it ought to be. And Lincoln wasn't trying to move it back to which slavery was ended. He just wanted to stop slavery from spreading into the new territories. So I would say, drawing on that analogy today, recognizing that the constitutional architecture has been somewhat perverted, has been somewhat distorted, the difference between the two parties is that we recognize that those perversions are wrong and are trying to move things back in the right direction. The other side insists that the perversions are right, and they want the perversions to continue.
All right. Dinesh D'Souza, our guest, author of quite a few books and movies, including America, Imagine the World Without Her. What do you have coming down the pike? What can we look forward to?
I'm working on a book that is tentatively titled Stealing America that HarperCollins will publish this summer. It's a book that draws on some of my own recent experiences, but also ties into a big insight on American politics that I haven't written about before. I'm also going to make a big movie for the next year that summarizes, that in a sense draws on the current political debate. And that'll come out in the summer of 2016.
Okay. Do you have a title for that?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, let us know when you do, and we'll be sure to talk to you about it. Thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, that was a great interview. Dinesh D'Souza definitely has something to say about the way things are going in America. And coming up, you know, Mom and Dad, you know how big of a challenge it is to raise children, to raise a child. But especially raising a child with special needs increases that challenge. And Lauren Wallin, author of Get Your Joy Back, is going to offer some relief and encouragement for weary parents in a great interview with Paulina. It's all coming up after this break here on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
Good morning. Welcome back to Focus Today. I am Jerry Bilden. As I mentioned earlier, if you've parented a child, you know that the challenge is great. The fatigue factor is also very great. But when you throw in the fact that special needs is involved with raising your child, that increases all of it. Our own Paulina Leiser had a chance to sit down with author Lauren Wallin, author of Get Your Joy Back, and talk about some of these challenges as she offers some encouragement. Let's hear in that interview.
1 out of 4 families in America is raising a child with special needs. And of course, nobody knows what those parents are going through unless that someone has walked in their shoes. Well, today I'm honored to have with us Lori Wallin. She's the author of a new book, Get Your Joy Back. Welcome, Lori.
For having me.
I know that this book and this topic are very personal to you, so let's start with your family. Tell us about it.
My husband and I have been married for 16 years, and about 10 years ago, we adopted 2 sisters from foster care locally, and they were preschoolers who'd been through 7 placements before they came to us. So we knew going into it that they would have a lot of attachment issues and things that we needed to do in terms of grief and loss for them, but we didn't anticipate them having the kinds of disabilities and long-term effect conditions that they ended up having. So between the 2 of them over the last 10 years, you know, they've got 12 different medical, mental health, and developmental disabilities.
So you weren't prepared for it. And when you were hit with that, what were your emotions like? Were you angry at the kids? Were you angry at yourself, at God?
Oh, they're everything, all of the above, and then probably another round of other things. I remember the first night that our oldest was diagnosed with bipolar, and we've got some family history of that. And I curled up in a ball on my bed and thought, I cannot believe that someone not biologically related to me, God has brought this back into my world for the rest of my life. And I thought, I'm not getting up. I do not have it in me to do this. But then I felt like he said, hey, this time you're the parent. You have power because I'm going to give it to you. You can get up and do this. And who else can do this better? You know what this looks like. And you know what it looks like when it's done well. And so I felt like he had sort of tailor-made some of the special needs that our kids have for me and the things that I've been through and the skills that I have and the experiences that I've had.
It's been 10 years. Do you still have those moments when you just feel like you can't make it through another day?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with disability is that it doesn't always come to light the first time you give it a try. You want to go to these specialists and you know that there's something not quite right with your child, but you have to go through that sort of requisite year and a half of trying parenting strategies, trying different diet, trying different vitamins, trying different sleep routines, all the different things that we do to kind of see if we can make it work on our own. And then at some point you realize, I think at some point I went way outside of what's normal for a parenting experience, and it's okay to get some help at this point. And we did that with our younger of the two girls. We went through probably 7 or 8 different professionals working with her, and she had all these different misdiagnoses in the mental health and developmental disability sort of realms. And it turns out just a year ago, 9 years after we had her, and after multiple psychiatric hospital placements and a year and a half in a residential psychiatric facility, that she has epilepsy. And, the seizures were manifesting like mental health disorders and things like that, and attention deficit and all of that, because it was affecting that part of her brain. And so in effect, she has all of those other diagnoses, but none of the traditional treatments work. And so she's been kind of an enigma, and it just keeps unfolding. There's always a new adventure.
Well, I can't imagine how hard it is for you, but I've heard from parents both of special needs kids and kids who officially don't have any special needs, say that there comes a point in their life where they just have to, regardless of the kid, give that child to God. Just kind of say, God, he's yours, she's yours. Whatever you have plans for the child, I'm okay with it. Have you come to that point yet? And how difficult is it for a parent of a special needs kid? Because I can imagine that you would probably always want to protect them. So have you given your kids to God, and how difficult was it?
Yeah, give in. I don't know if that is going to happen on this side of heaven, but I continually give them to him as things come up, because there's, as each developmental phase passes, or as each one that didn't pass in my older 2 daughters passes in my younger 2 biological daughters, then I see what we've missed, and I see what they're not doing and what they don't have as a possibility for them. And then I think, well, what did you put in that space, God? Because you've called all of us to abundant life. So what does abundant look like for them? And I have a daughter with vision deficits. She's not going to drive. And she's in middle school, and, she's 13, and friends are already looking forward to being 15 and getting their driver's permit out here in California. And that's not going to be part of her thing. And so we've always, every new stage, every new season, it's a constant giving it up to God. So what is their thing, God? This isn't. The traditional route isn't. So where do you want them to be?
In your book, and again, the book is called Get Your Joy Back, you're talking about forgiving your child. What exactly do you mean?
This is a really tricky place, and I knew that it was going to dig up some stuff for parents, and I've already gotten feedback from people who've read emails and things that said, I got stuck on this chapter, and I was there for a few weeks. because it's hard to admit, especially as a person of faith, that you have feelings about things, that taking care of a child who's way more than you expected actually makes you mad sometimes, and you sense the loss of the freedom that you might have had. You watch your friends and their kids getting into upper elementary, where their kids can wake themselves up with their alarm, and yours is not going to be there. So you've got a toddler for the rest of your life, and it's okay for us to say, I resent this. I wish it was different. I wish you could do more. I wish my efforts mattered more and made a bigger difference to you. I wish everything. There are so many losses, little losses, big losses that we go through. And because we're not a culture that grieves well or intentionally, then we don't really know what to do with those feelings. So we just feel bad about ourselves instead and just think, well, why do I feel like this? My kid didn't ask for this. They're a child, of course they're not trying to be hard. And even if they kind of are, because they have developmental or behavior disabilities like we've got going on, where it's kind of like, is this your choice or is this only what you're able to do? And there's this sense of like, are you trying to make this hard on us? So there's a lot of yuck that builds up toward our kids, and we don't want to admit it, and we feel like bad people when we admit it, and so we don't admit it, and then it comes out in our knee.
With you mentioned losses, but I do want you to talk about gains, because I kind of want parents to be encouraged. And you hear a lot of stories of parents of special needs kids who say there are a lot of losses, and yet there's something happened to your spirituality, something happens to your relationship with God, and just something happens to you when you have a child with a special need. So what are the gains?
The gains are there's a world out there you had no idea was there. And so my daughter, not only is she a lefty, which is its own thing, right? There's a whole different way of looking at the world, but she also has bipolar. She also has visual impairments. So she basically only sees what's within a 6-inch radius of her. So she is super detail oriented, and she sees things that we all miss, things we don't notice because we can see a bigger, broader range. She, because of her mental health issues, she's got a sense of depth for humanity and the kinds of emotions that people can go through and what it really feels like to be afraid, because paranoia is a real big player in this. And she gets when people are afraid, and she recognizes it in people when they're trying to cover it up. So she's the kind of kid who's able to say to her friend, what are you scared of? And she gets in her face, and sometimes it's socially inappropriate the way she does it. And so we work on that, but she has this boldness about her. And also the younger one, she's got a lot of medical special needs, and the mental health has been very tenacious, an issue with her. But she's the one who packs intentionally granola bars and water bottles to give to people who are on street corners. She doesn't leave the house unless she's got something to give them, a clean pair of socks. She's constantly talking about it, and she sees them, and she wants to make a difference. And she doesn't care if we have to pull off to the side of the road and take 5 extra minutes on the way where we're going, because the person is worth it. And those kind of things, they just rock your world,
What a gift. I can't imagine that this situation, your life, hasn't had, I'm sure it had some pressure on your marriage. So if you could summarize, I'm sure it's another book. How did you survive? How are you surviving and keeping your marriage alive?
Well, the hidden, that no one knows, but the hidden original title for the chapter that starts off with forgiving your spouse was when you feel like a single parent. And there are people who are single parents, so I couldn't use that for obvious reasons, but you just do. You feel like it's not a marriage. You feel like you missed that boat because you are really married to the care of your child. And for all intents and purposes, that is your significant other for the rest of their life, as long as they need you. And so you're almost married to two people, one who's supposed to be a functional person who you kind of hope will come riding in on their shining white horse and take care of you and sweep you up into your fictitious, this doesn't stink land. And it doesn't happen, and you're still struggling. And they don't understand how they lost their spouse to this situation. and there's confusion and there's isolation and it gets very heavy at times, and there can be a lot of blame that gets thrown back and forth. The parent who's in it every day blames the other one for not being there enough. The one who's not in it every day and who's going to work trying to pay for all the therapeutic and medical bills is coming in cold turkey to situations where they haven't been to all the IEPs and therapeutic meetings and suggesting a parenting technique that isn't going to work for the child, but the other parent only sees, the ignorance as being obtuse, and depending on how depleted the primary caregiver is, it can come across as aggression and deliberate hurtfulness. So if we're not taking care of ourselves, marriage is going to tank. And it's just a whole different dynamic to have two significant others.
Well, I know that your book is packed with advice. It has stories and interviews with, I think, 70 or so other families. So I would highly encourage anyone who has special needs children in their life or knows somebody, get a hold of this book. The book is called Get Your Joy Back by Lori Wallin. And Lori, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, Paulina and Lauren. And I'm very excited because coming up next, we're going to get to talk to an artist that you hear quite often on the Dove radio and have been listening to her for years. She's a young lady who can and has done it all. I mean, she's got a lot of things in her repertoire. She's got a new book out called One Last Thing. We're going to talk to Rebecca St. James about faith, values, and address the problem of pornography within marriage, culture, and our church. So our talk with Rebecca St. James coming up in a couple minutes right here on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Daniel and I work at theDove TV. Compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market, but at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Welcome back to Focus Today. I am Jerry Bilden, and as I said, I am very excited. We get a chance to talk to Rebecca St. James, an artist that you hear quite frequently every day, as a matter of fact, on the Dove radio. But that's not the limit of her talents and capabilities. She is an acclaimed actress and a best-selling author. She is a wife. She is a mother. I'm surprised, Rebecca St. James, you even have time to talk to us today, but I'm thrilled that you would be here with us. Welcome.
Hi, Jay. Thanks so much for having me.
You are welcome. And you have a new book out right now. The name of it is One Last Thing. It's available this month, right?
It just came out 3 days ago. Yeah,
excellent. And but it goes into some interesting subject matter. What prompted you to write a new book tackling the issue of pornography?
Yeah. Well, I had the privilege of working with an amazing author named Nancy Rue, who I've got to just give super huge props to. And she's a very, very accomplished fiction writer. And we wanted to do a 3-book series. So this is actually the 3rd book in the series, tackling topics that this generation of young adults really are dealing with right now in our culture. And so, we started out actually with self-harm in the first book, and then in the second book, it was about the topic of abortion, and then in this one, it's about pornography. And I think in these areas, a lot of people feel very alone, and they don't know where to turn, and they need encouragement and wisdom from God. But sometimes a direct, maybe self-help book on this issue might feel super heavy, or they feel intimidated by that. But a fiction book kind of comes in the back door of your heart in a way. You're reading about someone else's story, someone else's life and challenges, but then you're also getting God's wisdom through it. And so I'm really excited to have launched this book this week with Nancy and to see how God is going to use it to bring wisdom, hope, and encouragement, especially in this area of pornography.
That's an excellent direction and approach. Now, this is interesting. Stats from Huffington Post recently published a study that says that porn sites get more visitors than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. What is going on in our culture?
Well, it's incredibly shocking to hear that, because when you think of, how many people are on just Twitter alone every day, let alone Amazon, oh my goodness, and Netflix. It's appalling to understand that. And I think there's just a lot of confusion about how negative pornography is on relationships and marriages, and I think people kind of give in because they feel like, oh, maybe it's kind of acceptable now, maybe this is okay. And as Christians, we need to be very strong on the fact that this is wrong. Not only is this creating lust, and Jesus is very, very strong about what lust can be aligned with, adultery. Like it's like actually performing the act. And so he's very strong on that. So, but not only that, but I think it allows people to kind of turn to that instead of their spouse, which is very, very scary too. So just the division that it is creating in marriage and the breakdown of marriages, as well as the images that you can't get back out of your head. And so I think we've just got to be so loving to those that are in the middle of it, and saying, hey, I'll walk with you through this. We're gonna get through it together. We're gonna pray through it. We're gonna ask for God's wisdom, but also just be strong on it and say, you know what, I'm just not gonna have any part in this, and put filters on your computer. Do what you need to do. But the book, One Last Thing, really does address how to lovingly. It's about a girl named Tara who's 3 weeks before her wedding, and she finds out her fiance, Seth, has this hidden addiction that she never knew about. And so I think a lot of women may be in that situation, or maybe married and find that out. And so it helps women to figure out what to do.
I imagine that, in a large part of the world, there's going to be a lot of feeling that, what's wrong with this? I don't feel like this is a problem. It's kind of gotten almost to be a norm in society, yet inside the church, where we see this problem also existing, I imagine that there's the other side of the coin where people don't want to talk about it, that they want to remain hidden and keep this undercover. This got to create a special problem for being able to speak freely and try to get help for people who are in this addiction.
Yeah, and I really hope and pray that as the church becomes more aware that this is an issue in the church, and I think there is that understanding, but I think it's in a growing way. I hope that the church addresses it, and I think that there needs to be support groups for it, and whenever anything is hidden in the dark, Jesus is the light, and so we want every part of our life to be in the light, and that includes talking about it and sharing about it. And so I think obviously coming to your spouse first is the most important thing, that this is a struggle. But finding a mentor, that's one thing that the book really talks about, is that you need a mentor. And, there's actually a couple just really, really lovely, warm scenes, actually quite a bit throughout the book, and some humor that kind of helps break up the heaviness of it. But Tara finds a mentor who really helps her through the challenges of this, and I think that's what we need in the church.
A copy of the book there, don't you?
I do.
Could you hold it up? I don't have a copy. The name of the book is One Last Thing. We're talking with Rebecca St. James, who has penned this book, tackling this problem with pornography in our culture. We have a number of questions that we are still going to address coming up in a couple minutes here. But one last thing, if we can take a look at the cover of the book. Again, thank you so much. Rebecca St. James, I really, really appreciate your time with us. I can't wait till you come back to Southern Oregon and sing again for us.
Thank you. I would love that too. I love it there.
Yeah, wife, mother, author, actress, Rebecca St. James, we are just so pleased that you would come and be able to speak with us like this. And good luck to you, everybody. One Last Thing is the name of the book, and it's available right now. Rebecca St. James, good day, and thank you very much for spending time with us on Focus Today.
Thanks so much.
Hi, I'm Jim and I work at theDove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. And you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us.